Gaurav and I actually came back together. So this is the friend who actually runs TBO now, right? And we were the ones who started our first business together.
What was the story behind TBO?
TBO started in 2006-7. There was an offline travel business and there was a family which was running it. So using the capital and resources from our company and their company, there was a transaction that happened which basically became what is called TBO.
How did Fundamentum come about?
Shiva, I never planned to be a VC, nor was it a dream job for me. Never actually. So in fact, I didn't have a great opinion of VCs until I became one myself, right? I'm not saying that whether I was right then or I'm right now. I think around 2016-17, I was thinking that what is that I wanted to do for the next 20 years, 30 years of my life. And that is when Nandan Nilekani was putting together Fundamentum, right?
Ashish, what does Fundamentum do?
So we are a early growth stage investment fund. India had seen a lot of early stage fund and a lot of companies which had become better at iterating through the initial product market fit process. What we saw was that on the other side, in the other extreme, there are large funds like SoftBanks of the world and the big private equity and the Temaseks of the world and the Tiger Globals of the world who would come in when the companies are of a particular size. So we saw a void in between. Right, so we thought this gap is an opportunity, right?
Today we had Ashish Kumar, the co-founder, managing partner at Fundamentum. Fundamentum is a growth stage investor in India. They've invested in amazing companies like Spinny, Pharmeasy, Trobo, and few others. During our conversation, we chatted about Ashish's entrepreneurial journey, investing. We talked about growth investing in India. We talked about the opportunities in India and his advice to those who are thinking about moving back to India. And we got to know who Ashish is outside of work. Ashish, so good to have you on the podcast. I'm excited for it.
Thank you, Shiva. It is a pleasure to be here, and I think the venue is nice, and I look forward to the conversation.
Yeah. No, as we were talking about it, what Pratham has built is phenomenal. And your journey has been phenomenal. Uh, given, you know, you were in the US, came back, your first 10 years were around building companies. You built a company, sold it, you were a CEO of a publicly traded company as well. In between, there was a failure as well. In fact, you incubated or you were one of the first investor in a company which recently went public, which is TBO. And currently, you run one of the very rare uh, growth stage funds in India, which is Fundamentum. Uh, Ashish, maybe to get going, let's just step back. Right from the beginning, we are really a byproduct of our environment.
Mhm.
What shaped you the most growing up?
First of all, I think I would like to kind of say that last maybe 10, 15, 20 years, Shiva, that I've always built stuff, right? I think as either as a business or a fund or in general, I guess life. I think that is what I've been building, and you're absolutely right. I think we are all products of our environment, and my I would say first maybe 8 to 10 years was very similar to what a typical middle class family child will go through, right? My dad is a doctor, very strict father, right, and extremely loving mother, right? So that's how the split was. That to the extent that it was difficult for me to sit properly in front of my father to have a conversation because he's very strict, right?
Yeah.
And has had great work ethics, right? And he worked extremely hard. So the only thing that I knew was that, and we were like a usual middle class, maybe early days slightly lower middle class, maybe by the time I grew up it was upper middle class from my father's side. So I saw that if you work hard, right, you could actually do well in life, right? But the minimum that you have to do is to have a very strong work ethics, work hard. And then I will say the biggest impact during my childhood time was when I went to hostel. So I come from a reasonably small city. So
Mhm.
the options to study were kind of limited, right? And I was a reasonably difficult child for my parents to kind of handle, right? Because I could be very may not be the most compliant child, right?
Hmm.
So I went to hostel when I was in class fifth. Actually, that was the first time, and that I would probably think was the turning point for my life. And the reason, Shiva, is that I became very independent very early on in my life, right?
Hmm.
And to the extent that by the time the I was in probably grade seventh or eighth, you leave me anywhere in the world and I would survive. That was the confidence that I have had, right?
Hmm.
Until then, I also became a reasonably good sports person as well. I think that was also some of the thing that I, because it was a hostel, right, where we had to live 24 hours, and great facilities for let's say playing soccer, cricket, kabaddi,
Hmm.
handball, many of these games, right? And I don't think too many people get those opportunities. This was almost undesigned offerings and facilities that I had, and which has resulted in me becoming independent, me becoming, I would say, a reasonably diverse person. So at this point of time, I could choose multiple areas, have the confidence that I can learn that something very quickly, and then get going with it.
Hmm. What city you came from back then, and what hostel did you or what school did you go to?
Oh, so I come from a place which is right now in Jharkhand. It used to be Bihar at that point of
Hmm.
time. This city is called, very few people would have heard of it. It's
Uh-huh.
called Godda. And the first school that I went to was a school in Ranchi,
Okay.
right, which ultimately is the capital city.
Uh-huh.
So I was there until class 10th
Hmm.
in a residential school, and then after that came to Delhi, which is DPS Arkipuram. So I'm a product
Hmm.
11th, 12th. That's the second exposure to a larger city, and the only reason is that because my mom side is from Delhi, and I tell people that I had rich mamas and not so rich chachas, right? So,
Hmm.
it was very prudent for me to actually come to an area where I could get a little more exposure.
Uh-huh. I know I can relate with with what you said, you how you became independent because at such a early age you were in the hostel and making your own decisions. Similar experience I had where I started traveling because of tennis when I was 11, 12 year old, and I had to do almost everything by myself, whether starting from booking a ticket to anything like. But in hindsight, we realize what a blessing that is. And
And
Ashish,
Shiva, you must probably have even a more extreme environment, because I think the conditions for athletes in India back then, at least, it has probably improved now, but back then was even more difficult, right? I think you probably went through a little more challenging environment. I guess I had, when I compare with
yeah,
you, I may have had a good time.
absolutely. Yeah, I mean, bunch of my tennis friends with whom we used to play tennis. Now we think about these things, and actually, you wouldn't believe how easier, comfortable the life has become now for tennis players. It has completely
No
changed.
problem.
Uh, but you, probably after DPS, you probably went to IIT, and then you decided to move to the US. You were working at Microsoft. How did all of that came about?
Um, so, like I mentioned, that when you come from a middle class family, education is the way for you to basically move up the ladder, right? So
Hmm.
that's the only way that you could do, right? So, uh, when I went to hostel for the first time, since I had don't I didn't have too many things to do, that was the first time I truly started to study,
Hmm.
right? And with multiple things, I actually started topping my class.
Hmm.
And the moment you do it the first time, Shiva, right, you basically get confidence. And I've always seen in my life that you have to do something for the first time, be reasonably successful at it, and then you start, your system, your body, your environment start telling you that, what, I am enjoying it, and then you work harder for that, right? So the similar thing that kind of happened when I was, so from my initial days until class 10th, I went to DPS Puram, because I've always set up certain goals, that what is that I should be achieving in the next 5 years, right? So my goal at that point of time, I could only see that, hey, DPSRK Puram was the best school that I knew of,
Mhm.
right? I was like, and I figured out what is that I needed to do, right? And I could do a lot of my research. Of course, research these days is a lot more easy. Back then was a lot more difficult at, but that is what I did. Then I knew that I had to go to IIT. Then I fortunately got a reasonably good rank as well. I got computer science, and then like the next step was, you either will have to uh, go for higher education, or you basically take up a job. So I was clear that I wanted to explore what does the world's most successful country do different from any other country, right? Which happened to be US at that point of time.
Mhm.
And I was also clear that I had studied enough, so I didn't want to go do my master. So the other option for me was to um, figure out a place, right? And I was Microsoft was still hiring from India back then, and this is of course 20 years back or so. And I got an opportunity there, and which is why I ended up being there. And I thoroughly, I think, enjoyed that 3 year more than learning any skill. I just discovered myself a lot more in an environment which was very different from what I had seen, all my life prior to that.
Mhm. Ashish, what would be an example of that?
So as an example, I'll tell you. So Microsoft, when I was there, I had until then lived in a reasonably hierarchical society. When I say hierarchical, I mean professionally,
Yeah.
right? So whether I used to see my uncles or my father actually working wherever he's working, it was very hierarchical, right? And
Mhm.
whenever he was, I had a, like I said, I had my rich mamas, right? So when I also went to see their offices and so on and so forth, I could see that there was a hierarchy. The moment I went to Microsoft, it was such a, and this is back then when Google wasn't really the
Mhm.
thing that we know of Google to be, right? It was the days of Microsoft was growing like anything. It was extremely flat organization, and to the extent that irrespective of who you are, people would listen to you not because who you are. People would listen to you because what is that you are speaking,
Mhm.
right? So I think that is probably the best thing about US, that I kind of came back, and when I came back, and which was very, very useful. So when we set up our first company, which we will talk about,
Mhm.
I did not have a cabin, as an example. I, as the founder CEO of the company, which is very common now that
Mhm.
people don't have a cabin, but back then, 20 years back or so, it wasn't very common. And people used to be very surprised, because that is what I learned in the US, that when you start with valuing content rather than presentation and rather than designations, magic happens,
Mhm.
right? And I don't think there are too many countries on earth uh, which teaches you that. So that
Mhm.
I would probably think is the greatest thing that I learned from the
Learned
US.
that that stayed with you, and so you decided to move back. I think it was 2001.
So 2001 to 2004 is when I was there.
You
So
were there.
2001 is when I finished my engineering.
Mhm.
2001 to 4 is when I was at Microsoft. It was very funny that the day that I landed in the US, it was Halloween, right?
Uh-huh.
In fact, the second day was Halloween, and it was my first day in office, and I didn't know Halloween. Halloween wasn't 2001, wasn't what we know of
Yeah,
now, right?
yeah.
And I was like, and I show up at the office, and people are wearing all different types of stuff, and like I thought maybe Americans are crazy, but not this. Like, what is happening, man?
Would never imagine they would be this crazy.
Yeah, so 2004 end is when I came back. At 2005 is when I came back primarily because the intention was to start something.
Got it. So the intention was to start something, and back then it was not. I mean, now of course, you know, the sentiment of India opportunity, it's only just increasing year by year. But we're talking about 2004. Like I'm sure a lot of people in your network, and especially even parents or your your folks around your parents would be like,
Why are
"ये
you
कर
doing
क्या
it? Yeah, yeah,
रहे?"
yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
what was like that strong reason for you to come back, and how was it in the beginning? And we can talk about your first company.
Right. So it's a funny story that when of me coming back, right? So my parents, I was there for 3 years, right? My parents had not been to the US, right? And in fact, my parents had not been to any country outside India back then.
Mm-hmm.
And they have been thinking that now that the sun is settled, we will come, he'll show us around and whatnot, right? And I've been telling them, "Ab aa jaiye pehle," right? And they kept on pushing it.
Yeah.
And I've been driven by instincts quite a bit, right? Of course, you mature over a period of time, but when you are younger, you are driven even by more instinct, which I think in general has helped me more than it has hurt
Mm-hmm.
me. But the idea for me, even before my first job, was that I wanted to start something. It was some good advice that I got, that hey, you come from a middle class family, you don't probably know what does even business mean. Why don't you actually work for some time at some place? And which is why I went there. So this entire thinking that I had to start something, I wasn't necessarily married to the fact that I had to start something in India. It was very clear to me that I had to start something, and even during Microsoft, I've been thinking about certain things, and I've been thinking about certain things along with a couple of my friends as well
Mm-hmm.
there. And um, the reason, there was a time, like you keep working on something, and at one point of time you start hitting the walls, right? And you're saying that, now I have to basically start this. The way US immigration system is, right, and back then was a lot more different as well, is that, um, if the moment you leave your quit your jobs, right, you can only be there for some time until you have figured out a different way to. So that was one which where I knew that for me to continue to live in the US for next 6 months is going to be difficult without basically having a job. And I was very clear that, I can't be working at Microsoft and then starting something. That
Mm-hmm.
was one. The second was that I always believe that whenever you're starting something, revenue is not in your control.
Mm-hmm.
Costs are in your control. So what you need to do is that you have to decrease and lower your cost to the extent possible. And
Mm-hmm.
coming back to India was, which is why there was a choice,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so we bought a one-way ticket, and he said that, this is it. And I remember my manager was very at Microsoft was very gracious. He said at any point of time you want to come back, you come back, we like you, and so on and so forth,
Mm-hmm.
right? And but that is when I decided to come back with a particular idea that we were thinking of. There are two, one me, and there's another friend of mine who actually came on a one-way flight to Delhi.
Yeah. Who was that other friend?
So this is the friend who actually is runs TBO now. So Gaurav is the person. So Gaurav and I actually came back together,
Together.
right? And we were the ones who started our first business together,
Yeah. Let's dive into that, Ashish.
right? So yeah, no, I think every time you start a business fund or anything, the first few days are uh, very unpredictable, right? So when we came back, we had thought about doing something in the healthcare.
Mm-hmm.
My dad was a doctor, so I thought I knew something about healthcare, right? And I knew technology, so I thought maybe why don't we actually marry the two, right? And then we figure out.
even
So
even Gaurav was probably like, yeah, he must be telling something, right?
and when you're very young, you know a little. And I have realized in life that starting up is more act of courage than IQ,
Yeah.
right? So it actually helps to not know too much, right? And which is why if you look around, right, it is very difficult if you were to truly create a disruptive business. It does not usually come from people in that sector. It comes from people in different sector who will spend time, become good at it, understand domain, but it's very difficult for you to kind of do it otherwise. So back to it, right? So healthcare software, and we had some thoughts in mind, right? Of course, in hindsight, it was a rubbish idea,
Mm-hmm.
right? But of course, at that point of time, if somebody had told me this, I probably wouldn't have liked it, right?
Yeah.
So, and I remember trade fair used to be very popular those days, right? So I came to Delhi, and then we went. We thought, hey, we
What
have
is
to let.
trade fair?
So trade fair is, so Pragati Maidan in
Mm-hmm.
Delhi used to conduct a fair where they would actually invite a lot of businesses
Hmm.
and the buyers of those businesses.
Got
A
it.
buyer, as in the customer, potential customers of those businesses.
Hmm. The
So
marketplace,
yeah, it's a
offline
marketplace, right? So it's a
marketplace.
3-day, 4-day event that would
Yeah.
happen, right? And in some shape or the form, so there are IT trade fairs, there is a textile trade fair, and then there is multiple types of trade fair that happens, and a lot more popular. Then it has changed shape, but the idea still remains the same.
Hmm.
Um, so we went to a IT trade fair, and we looked at, we were looking around, and the reason we did that because, like I said, did not have too much of experience running businesses. We thought we should network.
Hmm.
So where do you network? So you basically meet all of these people, and then uh, we saw a guy basically selling the kind of software that we were thinking of on a CD, right? CDs used to be the thing at that point of time,
Hmm.
and the price was 500 rupees.
Hmm.
Like, oh shit,
Hmm.
it is going to be very difficult for us to even earn our salaries if we
Hmm.
were to do this thing, right? And that is when we started to think. So we came back thinking that this is what we do, and in a month or so, we did not know, we didn't have a clue that what is that we wanted to be doing, right? So, and back then, there was a term that used to be used quite a bit in the US called Web 2.0, right? Which, of course, everyone knows about it now,
Yeah.
but in India, people didn't know about this. Is 2004, Shiva, right?
Hmm.
So we got in touch with certain people, who were doing something in the US, and we effectively uh, hustled and got certain projects. And that was the idea for us, was that we didn't even think of this as a business. We thought that why don't we actually start generating some cash flow,
Hmm.
and we will think when as we are generating some cash flow, so that we don't have to ask our parents for money and whatnot.
Hmm.
And we got our first project, right? And then we got our second project because we were two techies, and we were reasonably good in terms of being able to kind of create software very quickly,
Hmm.
much faster than most other people there at that point of time. And that gave rise to our first business, which basically became Tekriti, because we thought that, and it was a very high margin, 60-65% EBITDA business on a software services, because it was new,
Hmm.
right? It is difficult usually to generate high margin in a services business because of commoditization. Since it was not commoditized, so we generated a lot of, like 60-65% gross margin, 35%, 40% EBITDA business. And these were
Hmm.
the days when all software exports were not taxed, nor neither dividends, right? So
Okay.
it was a good amount of money. I
Hmm.
remember that first year was $1 million of revenue, $500,000 of EBITDA, right? And if people had asked me that, hey, what is the amount of money that you would require in life, I probably would have said $500,000, right, to
Hmm.
retire.
Yeah.
But you got it, and then you realize that, like, there are certain activities in life which give you disproportionate return.
Hmm.
You just don't know what,
Hmm.
right? So you have to increase the surface area of luck, right?
Hmm.
And be active, which is and that is how, and we grew that business almost to a 400 odd people company, in a span of I think 5-6 years or so, right? Before we did not think that the business is going to grow significantly more from there on. At that point of time, I think commoditization also had happened in that
Hmm.
industry, and so on and so forth. And that is when we had an opportunity to sell that company, and we sold that company.
Got it. And uh, what was the story behind TBO?
So um, so we always wanted to do products, right?
Yeah.
If you ask me,
And TBO was post this, right?
TB was post this. So we
Yeah.
started our first business, Tekriti, which is in 2005,
Hmm.
right? And TBO started in 2006. We used to 2006-7, and we had also started one more company called Usource IT
Yeah.
around that time,
Yeah.
right? And the we were, like I said, we were generating significant profits, right?
Hmm.
And this was all kind of cash profit. We didn't have to. The government was gracious enough to not to tax this money because of the STPI, or the
Hmm.
the software exports laws that they have had. And we didn't have a use of the money as well, right? We didn't, coming from the usual middle class family, we didn't have a use of the capital. So
Hmm.
we were thinking, what is that we should do with this, right? And that is when we started. And when you are one of the uh, and we were very few people from with the background that we have had. Like think about, you know, on at a pedigree level, the IIT guys went to US, worked with Microsoft, came back to India. If you just kind of put all of this together without meeting me, you would say, oh, there is some substance, right?
Yeah.
That's how people would kind of imagine to be it. And not too many companies used to be started at that point of time, right? So people, we just got a lot of inbound interest from people wanting to work with us
Mhm.
in some capacity, right? And so what we did was that there was so we looked we spoke with a bunch of people, and one of the opportunity that we understood was that we are technology and product guys, didn't understand domain in many areas, right? We thought, is there a way for us to, partner with somebody who understands domain in a particular area, and then can we marry the two and then become large in that business? So
Mhm.
there was an offline travel business, right? And there was a family which was running it, and so using the capital and resources from our company and their company, there was a transaction that happened which
Mhm.
basically became what is called TBO now.
PBO, almost like a venture studio, where
Huh, I don't know whether there was a word like venture
yeah.
studio at that point, but you're absolutely correct. But one thing that we did well in hindsight now, that we didn't start like 10 companies under that venture studio.
Mhm.
We started three actually, right? Uh, One we quickly closed, right? It was, if we had sustained with it, it could have actually become what we now know as YouTube, right? But we didn't have that enough foresight or understanding, honestly,
Mhm.
because we are very early in that initial web era, right?
Mhm.
And understood technology, we didn't understand consumers too much, right? We understood enterprises, again coming from Microsoft background, which is primarily an enterprise company,
Mhm.
right? And um, what was I saying? I lost my chain of thought.
We were talking about venture studio.
Yeah. So when you look at, let's say, venture studio, so we did three. One
Mhm.
we closed very quickly. One was TBO. The other company was USource IT, for which we also raised a round of venture capital,
Mhm.
right? And the idea there was that just like there is a company like Tekriti, there are many more smaller services companies which are good in terms of thinking about technology and product, but actually did not do a good job at selling. So
Mhm.
we thought, could we actually become a sales partner for them and create a technology to make that matchmaking easier
Mhm.
and provide some sort of oversight layer so that the entire project delivery actually becomes seamless.
Mhm.
So with that vision, and that was my first foray into raising venture capital,
Yeah.
right? And there were probably 10, maybe less number of funds actually at that point of time. And we raised, if I remember correctly, this is 2006, maybe 700, $800,000 is what we ended up raising back then.
Mhm.
Yeah, but that was the business, and that business eventually did not do well.
Yeah.
It is funny, but yeah, that was the story.
Yeah. So, as we talked about, you built some company, you incubated some, you started investing in companies. Then, what interested you about venture capital? How did Fundamentum come about, and the entire journey?
I Shiva, I never planned to be a VC, nor was it a dream job for me,
Mm-hmm.
right? Never actually. So in fact, uh, I didn't have a great opinion of VCs until I became one myself, right?
Yeah. Nice.
And I'm not saying that whether I was right then or I'm right now. the 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 point is,
And
I'm just more
we'll
aware.
also double click on why you changed your mind.
Yeah, sure, sure. Yeah. So, but see, I think when I got my first $1 million perhaps in the year fourth or fifth of my starting my first company. That was when I got my first $1 million. And in India, I think it is a good amount of money, right? And
Mm-hmm.
I was reasonably certain that it gives me liberty and freedom to now not necessarily money be the number one parameter for to work, right?
Yeah.
It is of course important, but it was not the number one you could choose a little bit more,
Mm-hmm.
right? uh, and then my exit happened, which of course gave me a little bit more money, right? And that is when I also got little more free in my mind, that because we could now, when after I sold the business actually also got more money in from a primary capital, right? So we could hire more people, build more capacity, which I did not have as a bootstrap entity, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the I then what I started to do was that I actually put together a very small pool of capital and started to invest in public stock market, right? And this was 2000 and I think 10 11 time frame. This is around that time frame.
Mm-hmm.
I ended up I tried a few things here and there, and I zeroed down on investing in companies which were small cap, right? Half a billion to a billion to $2 billion maximum. That was the range. And I started to buy a little bit more, right? Sometimes touching even a percent. So the moment you of the company, right? And the moment you do that, you start getting audience with the promoters of the company as well.
Mm-hmm.
So for one, like I was generating a very good IRR, almost 30% kind of IRR is what I was generating in a public market, right? Which some of this is perhaps my doing, but a lot of that was also honestly
Mm-hmm.
markets were like that, and at small cap, I think you have to be half smart to actually generate more than what the typical markets are giving you, right?
Mm-hmm.
Back then, I think it's become a little more competitive at this point of time.
Yeah.
But the so I enjoyed that process, because the reason I enjoyed that process, because it allowed me understanding of multiple industries,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I'm a person, over a period of time, I've realized that I feast on new knowledge. Every time I get new knowledge, it actually excites me, it stimulates me,
Mm-hmm.
right? And investment as a work, right? Actually, you have to be good at that, and you have to enjoy that process, because if you don't do that, you will do a very bad job at it,
Mm-hmm.
right? So one was that I started enjoying the process. The second was that I was doing reasonably well with my returns. And then uh, and after so after I sold my company, I was there for around 2.5 3 years, and then I quit, and I tried a few things on um, you know trying to build consumer apps as well, which failed miserably. I lost a little bit of money, but in during this period, I figured out maybe a few things. One is that I had a reasonable good smell of people,
Mm-hmm.
right? And the reason it happens, because when you run an organization or enterprise for some time, you will naturally develop that,
Instinct.
right? And I mean, if you don't have it initially, marketplaces will teach you enough, right,
Mm-hmm.
that you will become good at it, right? That's one. Second is that by the virtue of me doing public market investment, I st- understood how to read market. I did not do a standard MBA, so a lot of those terms which probably could have been taught in the MBA, I just learned it during that time without necessarily knowing that articulation. And this is when, like if you look at investment, understanding reading markets and reading people are probably 70 80% of the work,
Mm-hmm.
right? And this is when I was I think around 2016 17, I was thinking that what is that I wanted to do for the next 20 or 30 years of my life. And that is when Nandan Nilekani was putting together Fundamentum, right? And uh, Sanjeev and I had, who is the third founder, Sanjeev and I had met at a different place. And in fact, the two of us had met at my house for a different purpose earlier on. And that was how, the moment he told me that, Nandan is behind it, I was like, okay, and I don't know whether I want to be a VC or not, but
Mm-hmm.
I of course want to meet Nandan, right?
Yeah.
That is and I had ensured that I had the best camera phone I could afford back then, right? So
Yeah.
that, at least when I go there, I will take a selfie with Nandan, right? So it is the conversation with Nandan. I wasn't even honestly sure that whether I wanted to be VC even after I met him, but I knew that he is the man who could develop my thinking significantly more than what I already had, right? And then I also checked with certain people, my well wishers, advisors, and so on and so forth, and they were like, don't even think, just work with that man. I think in a 2 years you will be a very different person. So that is how it started, and of course now I've started to enjoy it.
Got it. I would assume what changed your mind is probably once you became an investor, you were just enjoying it, and you appreciated or started appreciating more about investing. Um, Ashish, what does Fundamentum do? You know, what check sizes, what kind of companies it invests in. I know that it invests in Series B and beyond. Let's hear it from you about Fundamentum.
So we are a early growth stage investment fund, right?
Mhm.
And the opportunity that we saw, Shiva, and this is 2007 years back, 2017 or so, was that India had seen a lot of early stage funds and a lot of companies which had become better at iterating through the initial product market fit process, right?
Mhm.
So that was one when we thought, and because the ecosystem was probably 10, 12 years old by then, right? Make my trip IPO had happened, so there was enough number of people who knew that if you do a good job, you'll be rewarded handsomely, right?
Mhm.
Um, and then uh, w- what started to what we saw was that on the other side, in the other extreme, there are large funds like soft banks of the world and the big private equity and the Temaseks of the world and the Tiger Globals of the world, who would come in when the companies are of a particular size. So we saw a void in between,
Yeah.
right? So we thought this gap is an opportunity, right? So, and what also helped was that Nandan used to invest angel capital in companies back then, and his angel checks used to be $5 to $10 million, right? So
Mm.
so it naturally happened to be not the early first
That's a
stage
real
company,
angel.
right? That's a real angel, you're right. And he is a
Usually
generally
it's 5 to 10 lakhs.
so I mean, he also had a bias for companies at that particular level,
Yeah.
right? And I think if you look at the design of the firm, we are, you know all people in some position of influence actually have built businesses as an entrepreneur or operators with good experiences, right? And almost a negative bias for people who had not invest who had only invested and not, let's say, been an operator or an entrepreneur.
Mhm.
So we also thought that this space, whether in the middle, is also right for us, right? So whenever you look at a company, you always ask question: is there a founder market fit?
Mhm.
And that's a question we asked ourselves as well, right? Is there a founder market fit, right? And the what we thought was that at a very early stage you will look at, let's say, top down market, you'll interact with the founder and you don't have any other data, right? You'll have to kind of write investment there. But at a early growth stage you have some data now. So given that we had an operating experience, we thought that we could look at that data, understand a little bit more nuances of the business, and then be able to make a choice whether this is a company that we should be investing into or not, right?
Mhm.
um, and so that was the strategy that we started with. I think we got our strategy right, primarily because uh, there are very few number of funds actually who operated in that space,
Mhm.
right? So we naturally had access to the best company that available, right? And venture capital is honestly more of an access game as the industry matures than anything else,
Mhm.
right? So, and that's what Fundamentum has done. So our first fund was slightly less than $100 million. I think 90 odd $1 million is what we ended up investing in some great companies, and vertical commerce is one that area that we picked up at that point of time, more consumption. And we also looked at software as a service sector, because that's, again, software sector is what Nandan had uh, great experience in. I
Mhm.
had some experience in. And now we are deploying from the second fund, very similar thesis. uh, but the fund, of course, is larger because that's how the ecosystem has evolved. So we are close to 230 odd $1 million at this point of time.
Hmm. Yeah, I think from the first fund, correct me if I'm wrong, you invested in companies like Pharmeasy, Spinny, uh, called Far Eye, and few others. And I think overall the portfolio has cumulatively raised over $1 billion or so. Maybe in in simple language, Ashish, we can talk about one or two companies. How did those investments came about? More so, like people can understand how does the fund operates,
Hmm.
what kind of companies they look at,
Right,
and what's like the sweet spot is.
right. So uh, we will, Series B is what we call it, right? A lot of these, honestly, alphabets have lost meanings in the
Mm-hmm.
last 5 8 years or so, right? But our idea is that we would invest in companies which have gotten a product market fit, right? Which means that the company has a product which is known that there is adoption to it,
Mm-hmm.
right? A lot of times it will be driven by revenue, some semblance of unit economics, right? And a good net promoter score or a good customer satisfaction score, right? All of these things have to be aligned. And then we say that, is the company raising anywhere between, let's say, $20 million to $40 million round, and we would write roughly half the check.
Got it.
That's the now what is important to us is that the reason why we do that, if you look at digital ecosystem in India rewards the number one or number two player in any industry. And if you are in the top one or two, you will make money. If you're not in the top one or two, you also lose money, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's important for you to get it right. You would ideally want to invest in a company where the leadership is not clear, but after you invest in less than 2 years, the leadership should be clear and your company ideally should be a leader, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the moment you apply this lens, right? So then what you would do is that you will meet all companies in that space, figure out two answers, right? One answer is that, is this space good for me to operate? Can I understand it? Is this space going to become large, right? uh, and the second question that you answer is that, which of the five or six companies that you typically uh, are reasonably worth looking at in this that sector is what you would invest into,
Mm-hmm.
right? And third is that, is there a way for one of the company that you are invested in is to attain leadership in the next 18 to 24 months? The moment you get that answer, and the answers are usually very similar, right? You have to have great founders who understand domain. You have to look at value proposition, that it is truly, like, deep enough and significantly better than alternate options that are present in the country at that point of time, or in the
Mm-hmm.
geography at that point of time. And third is that there is resilience in the founders, because creating a business is actually a long process, right? So you don't want to fail because the founders got tired,
Mm-hmm.
right? There are multiple other reasons that why you could fail, but
Yeah.
that's okay, right? So you don't
Uh-huh.
want to fail. We were clear about, we didn't want it to fail because the product did not have a demand from a product market fit perspective,
Mm-hmm.
and the founders would not get tired, right? So the
Yeah.
moment we did that, and so we looked at bunch of sectors. Our first company was in the travel sector. The second company was Pharmeasy. The third company that I invested in was Spinny. And we would always come in. Typically, our entry valuation would be less than $100 million, right? So 90, $100 million was the sweet spot that we kind of came in.
Mm-hmm.
And the first company did not do well. The second and the third company became a $1 billion company, unicorn, in like 2 to 3 years. I think that also was very, very helpful, because you do need
Early
to,
hits.
yeah, early hits. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. Recently, Ashish, you wrote an article around it where it was more around growth investing has reached critical mass, but it needs local understanding. Can you maybe double click on that?
Absolutely. And I think that's a important point, Shiva, that you brought up. So if you look at economies across the world, many economies will behave very similarly at similar stage in terms of the type of consumption that people would do,
Mhm.
right? So which means that then, like, the moment you become wealthier, you will consume more number of brands. You also consume, let's say, depending on what is your earning level, luxury brand or not so luxury brand, and so on and so forth, right? You would go travel internationally and not only domestically. So there are certain patterns that are there.
Mhm.
But what is different is that the business model to achieve the same consumer behavior could be different. And I'll give you an example. So if you look at US as an example, which is one of the greatest venture market,
Yeah.
the m- business model in commerce that has worked the most are true marketplaces. They would typically not hold inventory, right? And
Mhm.
the reason is because the supply from where the inventory is or the stuff is, and people are buying, is of a, we know that is of a particular quality. It
Mhm.
is established because that's how the economy has kind of grown, and people are used to
Yeah.
expecting things like that. In India, if you look at unorganized market, there is a great challenge that there is significant number of competitors, and the only way that people are able, or a lot of ways that people are able to win is by lowering cost, and in lowering the prices of the products that they are selling,
Mhm.
given that we are a large trading country. And as a result, they would, to compensate for that, they would also pay their people lower amounts, right? Their employees and the contractors and so on and so forth. Net what happens is that the quality at a, absolute leaf node in a country is not very good.
Mhm.
And which is why the moment you try to do a marketplace model in India, it becomes very difficult. So what has worked in India, if you look around, is mostly full stack, right? Flipkart and all of the early successes, they, hold significant amount of
Significant.
inventory, right?
Yeah.
Which is uh, whether it is grocery, whether it is electronics, whether it is many other categories. So that's basically, and you will, if you're not lived in the country, you don't understand this deeply enough,
Mhm.
right? And that's basically one example that I would give you. I'll give you another example, right?
Mhm.
So when we invested in this company called Spinny, Spinny was perhaps, if I remember correctly, maybe the fifth company or sixth company in that space. And when I say that space, used car,
Mhm.
right? Spinny was the only one of the two companies which was doing full stack. And by full stack, what I meant was that they would buy companies, they would hold them in that inventory, they would refurbish it and then sell it. If you look at traditional VC playbook, they would say, hey, it's a bad idea, but why would you, use or deploy capital in inventory and whatnot?
Mhm.
But we knew that in India, you have to first solve for value proposition before you solve for business model.
Mhm.
If you solve for business model without solving value proposition, you'll certainly die. You could still die if you solve for business,
Yeah.
for value proposition and business model does not work out. You could still die, but there is a chance that you will continue to work. And if you look at multiple industries, there will be similar traits that would happen, right?
Mhm.
And that's what I mean by, you know you have to understand truly the roots of the country.
Of the country. Yeah. And Ashish, you also mentioned that the line between the private equity and venture capital is blurring, and there's a call for non-linear bets in the country. Why would you say that, and what does that mean?
So um, not too many people will agree with me on this
Mm-hmm.
one, actually. So I always, when people ask me that what is a more contrarian view that I think I this is one of the example that I kind of talk about.
Yeah.
See, um, ultimately at the end of the day, a job of a venture capitalist is to invest in great companies, great founders, and effectively generate a return and give it back to the LPs, right? That's basically what it is.
Yeah.
But that's true for all types of pools of capital, whether it is uh, VCs or whether it is private equity, right?
Mm-hmm.
Traditionally, the way private equity was structured was that you would take a large portion of the company. These will be, you would control execution to a large extent, and you would get outstanding people who knew about those, and then you will go on a more predictable path, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the advantage that you are able to bring as a private equity is that your reputation and capital, because of which you will be able to attract good quality people in an areas that the company is already, right? And which is why a lot of founders, entrepreneurs may not be able to scale the company, while they may be good at initially starting the company and getting to a particular small scale. Now, on the VC, the VC has traditionally thrived on innovation as a lever. And the way, if you look at most successful VC investment globally,
Mm-hmm.
most of these companies have had little parallels in terms of their end offering, which is why gross margin, if you again look at the VC playbook, gross margin is a very important driver. And why will a high gross margin happen? Because you have lesser competition. Why will there will be lesser competition? Because there is a barrier to entry. Why will there be a barrier to entry? Because there is innovation angle,
Mm-hmm.
right? Now, so that's one on purely the asset class. Why I made that statement that I made was also that if you look at now geopolitics, most or all top, let's say, if you are in aspire to be the top 5, 8, 10 countries in the world, you will have to be what our prime minister calls as Atmanirbhar. Primarily because the moment you start moving up the ladder, you would not all nations will like it. So
Mm-hmm.
you will have to generate, or you will have to have a lot of the IPs owned by you, and you have to start now. You can't basically say that, you know what, once I have become large, then that is when I will kind of solve it.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, take an example of, let's say, AI, right? And there has been a lot of conversations about that India should not create models, but India should only use models. I have an opposite view actually on that one, right? I think that absolutely is there, but India will have to create, you know, models as well, right? They may not need not do large language models, but they should do small language models as an example. Because if you do not create this, and you do not create this talent base, for your ability to create many of these things will not be there,
Mm-hmm.
right? So that's one example. I am very happy on, as an example, on the contrary, what is happening on the space side. If
Yeah.
you look at, right, space tech, I think will be an outstanding thing for India.
Mm-hmm.
Similarly, quantum is another area that I think India is very serious about, because in a way, if you look at AI infrastructure war, we probably, or AI infrastructure divisions, right? I don't think we are there yet. We
Mm-hmm.
probably, hopefully, will get there in some time. But we have to figure out what are the next big areas in technology that we should become good at,
Mm-hmm.
right? So quantum, I think, is another area. Another thing that Nandan is doing as an example, which is all the India stack, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think that those are some of the areas where uh, we as nation will actually do well. But certain things will be done by government and philanthropic capital, like what Nandan is doing. But
Mm-hmm.
I think the entrepreneurs will also have to do it, because otherwise the space will become so competitive so quickly, and you'll always be reliant on, expo or imports from larger countries, which at one point of time, the moment there is geopolitics coming into play, it will be a problem. Right now, China is the one which is probably facing
Mm-hmm.
the heat because of geopolitics, and India is a beneficiary. I don't know whether it will always be like
Yeah.
this 5 years later.
Once India rises, then it will become
So we have to be
big.
ready.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and I think you picked up a great point on space, where I think the government is taking a note. I think they recently launched 1,000 CR, but that's again, like, we have a long way to go.
Well,
But what I really liked was ex Secretary of Defense India has launched a fund, 400 CR fund investing in space
space.
and defense.
Yeah.
So that's showing a sign of how or where India has come or has reached in the
Right.
last, let's say, 15 20 years, especially in the Indian technology. Because when you also mentioned uh, the last 20 years, the business models, there were four different kinds of business models. One was tech
Right.
savvy, second was business, third was impact, and fourth was outliers.
Hmm.
Uh, and 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 even I was also, so I read your post, and I was also not too sure about the fourth one, which you mentioned, and in the comments as well, people were
Asking
actually
that question, right?
asking this. I think the Simply Learn founder, a few others, your advisor from Big Basket, I believe. Uh, but would love for you to, maybe in simple language, tell us what that post is about, and what's that fourth point is about.
Yeah, so I think if there is a simple answer to the fourth point, I don't think it would be called outliers, right? So
Yeah.
it is called outliers because
We don't know
it
what
kind
that
of
outlier is.
encapsulates, right? So, but I'll talk about what I think about it. But maybe prior to that, so see, the post was more about that when I like establishing patterns across because I think there is lot more repetition of patterns in different way that when you look around, right? And that's a way for you to generate ideas. That's a way for you to evaluate ideas. That's a way for you to have to form a worldview on how the world could look like, let's say,
Hmm.
in future, right? And as entrepreneurs and investor, I think it's a very very important skill to have, and you will be wrong multiple number of times,
Yeah.
but the point is that if you're right, then you should be right in a big way.
Hmm.
So I was saying that earlier, technology guys were uh, found it easier to create IT services business, and I did that myself, and there are a
Hmm.
lot of other people who also kind of did that. A lot of business savvy people, since they did not know or could code in technology, so for naturally for them they looked at other outsourcing because outsourcing was the theme back then, and they used they started business in BPOs, KPOs, consulting, and so on and so forth, right?
Hmm.
The third is education was the favorite for people or founders who wanted to generate impact, and this entrepreneurs are very passionate people. They have to be, right?
Hmm.
Because it is the journey is so tough that if you're not passionate, you will not be able to kind
Yeah.
of survive really. And the fourth one were kind of outliers, and outliers back then was consumer internet companies, because I mean, you think about, let's say, 10, 15 years later, our GDP per capita was probably, I don't know, $1,000 maybe, right?
Hmm.
Or 1,200, $1,300. How would you make money, right?
Yeah.
Right. And people did not know the answer to that question, even for Flipkart. And there have been like, until they got sold for some 26, 28, $30 billion, I
Hmm.
think there were people who were naysayers until then,
Hmm.
right? But there were some people who basically took up that, and the reason why these companies became successful because the value proposition was very very strong. Did we need a Flipkart? Did we need a e-commerce? The answer is yes. the, did the business make sense from in terms of generating profit? No.
Hmm.
But I think I've learned about life that if your value proposition is good and you continue to do the job with great resilience, there's a high chance that there will be somebody who will continue to believe the story, saying that business does not make sense because of macro factor today, but it could make sense 10 years later,
Yeah.
and they'll continue to kind of invest into that.
Hmm.
When I look at now, right? So it's creating IT services business is a very difficult one. There's too much of competition and whatnot, right? So, but SaaS is what people are building. So, if you understand technology, you will find it easier to write code and so on and so forth, right? And especially with the AI stack, it has become a lot more easier, right? So,
Hmm.
what probably used to take you, 2 years and 50 people to code, now you could do the same thing in, let's say, 6 months with a 20 people team, as an example, so on and
Hmm.
so forth, right? So there is set of people who are building those businesses, I think, and I think they will generate value. They'll create value. They'll also capture value. Second is climate is the one where people are saying that is the big theme, right? And if you're in Delhi, which is both of us are, right,
Hmm.
it is right out in the face that there is. Can you treat the climate lot better than what it is today, right? And there are a bunch of entrepreneurs who are working on these areas. I think it is going to be creating great impact. I think monetization is a question that I think, and I would at least recommend people, if they're starting companies on the climate, think about monetization. Just don't go by impact, because um, it's otherwise become very difficult for you to kind of capture.
Hmm.
The fourth one, which is the outlier, I can tell you the two areas that I find outliers will be created. India is largely a consumption economy and will continue to be a consumption economy. And the largest value gets created when you are able to create a distribution platform, not necessarily just a brand,
Hmm.
right? The brand businesses will also make money, which was my second point, that there are some good entrepreneurs who would create brand businesses, and you could get to, let's say, 400, 500, 600 crore of top line, maybe 1,000 crores, right, in certain, for a singular brand. But it'll create maybe $1 billion, half $1 billion to $1 billion outcome, and these numbers will continue to go up as the economy goes
Mm-hmm.
larger. But if you were to think about alternate distribution platforms, right, and quick commerce is one way
Yeah.
that people have taken advantage of that. But we have also invested in a company called, let's say, Kuku FM,
Mm-hmm.
right, which is a content distribution platform. Started with an audio, because you need to also find a wedge, but they would do multiple other form factors as well. They could do, differentiated video, they could do animation, they could do tunes and whatnot, right? So
Mm-hmm.
you have to think about certain consumer distribution platforms that does not exist in the country, right? And if you're able to do so, you will create a very, very, very large outcome,
Mm-hmm.
right? That's one set of companies. The second setup, which is what I was talking about from an AI, right? There is a lot of this conversation around service as a software, right? So I mean, think about digital services. Digital services earlier required people who would use software, right? And which was software as a service, because people would use software to record certain things or analyze certain things and whatnot. Now it is possible, because of the way AI has, and thanks to GPTs of the
Mm-hmm.
world, and now what others have done after that, it is possible to do a replace or augment a lot of humans on what the way they were providing digital service with the software.
Mm-hmm.
And the moment you do that, this entire profit pool becomes like 10 to 50 times to maybe 100 times larger than only the software profit pool. So can you do that, is a question, right? But and a lot of people are attempting to do that, but I think most people are attempting to build it on the top of existing, let's say, infrastructure, which are open ais, or let's say something by Google, and something in the
Yeah.
soft in the challenge with that, the world is so competitive that the moment you figure out a use case and you do not have truly an IP or a barrier to entry,
Mm-hmm.
then you will have a lot more competition, and it will be commoditized so quickly that by the time you start reaping benefits of it, you will probably have 30 people doing the same thing.
Yeah.
So the only way for to do that, you have to figure out what is your defensibility. And I have seen some great people thinking about exactly their small language models, right? Because the moment you build a small language model, that becomes your IP,
Mm-hmm.
right? And there are different ways to think about what is a small language model that would make sense, which probably will not be done by the LLMs for a next maybe
Mm-hmm.
several years or so, right? So those are the opportunities that I see where outliers would be created. But like we said, outliers are outliers. I think there will be somebody else who will come in with a very different example than the ones that we have spoken about.
Well spoken about, yeah. Uh, Ashish, look, you've done it yourself. Uh, you've come back, built companies, sold companies, and you founded uh, one of the top growth stage funds in India, and now you've been, you know, nurturing the next generation of entrepreneurs for the last almost 8 years, and you know more about the tech ecosystem than most of the people out there, given you were so early. So you understand the opportunity moving forward, next 20, 30 years. And, you've mentioned, we've spoken about compound interest multiple times. And what advice would you give to folks, who are living abroad and thinking about India and India as an opportunity?
So I think first of all, next 10 years, 20 years of India is going to create enormous amount of wealth, right? And the reason is twofold, right? One is that geopolitically we are in a very, very sweet spot at this point of time, right? So a lot of stuff is moving from countries like China for one reason, and then there are aging population in certain other countries like let's say Japan, Korea, and whatnot, who also have done a bunch of great stuff, right? A lot of that stuff will have to come to some country, and India is in a great place geopolitically from that perspective. That's
Mm-hmm.
one reason. The second, I don't think I have ever seen such a large number of ambitious people in one location. Like I'll tell you one anecdote, right? So I remember when I was running my first company, I was actually on a flight to US. I used to go there every 3 months or so. And there's this American gentleman, that was sitting next to me, and we just suddenly started to chat. And one question that I asked him that, hey, you've traveled so much, right? You've traveled to China, you've traveled to India, you've traveled to like 80 different countries and whatnot, right?
Mm-hmm.
What is that you think is will the world look like in terms of which nations will do well and whatnot? He mentioned one thing very interesting to me, that he said that if you look at Ashish, it is all about ambitions of people, right? American entrepreneurs were the most ambitious, because of which the money from all different nations actually came to American entrepreneurs who created global companies.
Mm-hmm.
Not only American companies, but global companies. That's
Mm-hmm.
what basically did. The next set of money moved to China, and which is why you now have Chinese companies, right, going global. I mean, TikTok, ByteDance are is the greatest example, but
Yeah.
there are bunch of others as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he actually he told me that I see the same thing in India, right? And what you guys need to do is that you have to think global, right?
Mm-hmm.
So to the friends in US or people living outside India, I think the advantage that you have is that while you have your roots in India, and if you spend a little bit of time, you will understand areas of your interest. And the
Mm-hmm.
only way to do that is to spend a little bit of time in India. You can't be reading newspapers or just hearing this conversation and know about this, and figure out a way that what is that you have learned in the US as well, and figure out a cross border profit pool that could make sense, starting from India but then going outside.
Going outside.
That I think is the unfair advantage that you have, that nobody, people staying only in the US or people staying in India has,
Yeah.
right? So I did my first business as a cross border. Whenever if you look at a lot of our investments more recently,
Mm-hmm.
many of these have cross border flavor as well, right? So there is a consumption flavor, and then there is a cross
Cross
border
border.
flavor. So this stays with you, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because you intuitively understand it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Another thing that I learned about when I first went to the US was just to how do you speak with people from 30 different nationalities, right? And then become friends with them. And you got to understand that, hey, whether you are from India, whether you're from China, whether you're from America, whether you're from wherever, right? I mean, at a core level, people are people, right? And but you start understanding them a lot more, and the way their body language, the way they would operate lot better, and those things are very helpful. In India, the last thing that I would say is that India is a country which rewards resilience far more than any other country, or the US at least would do. And the reason is because it is a lot tougher to build businesses in India. It was tougher, probably it was even more tougher, let's say 5 years, 10 years back, but still is tough. But the plus side is that if you stick around,
Mm-hmm.
it pays you in the form of market share. I mean, look at the successful companies' market share in India. You will not find similar type of market share in the US, as in most industries,
Mm-hmm.
right? You look at automobiles, there is like two companies which have about 70% market share, between Maruti and Hyundai,
Mm-hmm.
right? Look at brands, you will find similar behavior, right? And the reason is because they have spent a lot of time in India, understood the nuances of it. And even though it looks like we are many nations in one, but it truly, the moment you start spending time, to an outsider it will look like multiple nations. To
Mm-hmm.
somebody living in India, it does not look like that,
Mm-hmm.
right? So those are some of the areas that you will have to but you should do it only when you want to get your hands dirty. It is not a India is not a office job company that you could create.
It's there's a meme typically. India is not for beginners.
Yeah, yeah.
No, I was reading something, Ashish, where basically it talked about a lot of these global companies, whether it's let's say Google, Uber, Airbnb. or any, like for even let's say Snapchat or Instagram, a lot of them they come to India to actually build products, and the products that are built in India are exported to majority of the world, which is emerging countries. And earlier it was more about just back office and cost arbitrage, but now India has become a innovation hub that we are seeing. And I think this will only, someone was telling me, this is the ripple effect would be a lot of these people who are actually building these products here and exporting it to the rest of the world, they are the ones who could actually build companies in India for the
for
world,
the world.
because they'll end up learning those and just apply for themselves. Moving to our final part, Ashish, um, maybe let's start with, what's your typical day like?
Very unpredictable,
Yeah.
right? Because investment, the nature of the business is such that there are peaks and troughs, right, in terms of your engagement.
Mm-hmm.
But I would say 80% of the time you are able to choose your calendar,
Mm-hmm.
and that is the best part of the job that I like about it, right?
Yeah.
uh, Typical, if you ask me, in a week I would probably spend maybe half my time meeting entrepreneurs, right? Maybe 10-15% generally talking to stakeholders, other investors, like other team members, and so on and so forth, and 30% thinking,
Mm-hmm.
right? And you create a framework. Everyone creates their own framework for thinking, and the reason is that because you meet so many people from such varied industries, that until you internalize, digest, and figure out your own patterns, your subsequent meetings will not be very effective, right? In our business, you have to be truly, every year you have to become significantly better than where you were a year back, because if
Mm-hmm.
you don't, so you're dated,
Yeah.
right? Your career as investor is kind of over, right? So uh, it is also a great job, because if I were to, let's say, you know go to watch my son play something, it is a lot more easier than if I was working in an operating company, as an example, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because like I said, I could choose.
Yeah.
I can and It's a great job, because uh, the world's best founders actually come to you, explain their business to you, and it's very
Mm-hmm.
intellectually stimulating.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think you mentioned you were working on staying relevant as an operator,
Yeah.
where you would specifically dedicate your time towards learning new skills and staying relevant. Just like in tennis, you can call yourself tennis player after 10 years if you are still not playing. Uh, and Ashish, what are you most obsessed about these days outside of work?
So over a period of time, I have you know understood that I can only do few things, and the reason is because I'm so I'm a type of person who likes to do anything that I'm doing. I like to do it well. I It's very boolean for me. It's very difficult for me to be uh, so in anything,
Mm-hmm.
right? So the aspiration always to is to be so. You could say that I could be very competitive, and that's a plus and minus both, right? In a
Mm-hmm.
way, um, but I like to. Kids are one of my uh, I'll not say obsession is maybe a stronger word. It's a very large focus area for me. And the way that we do as a family is to travel to multiple places. So that's like, so we typically will take almost every year, we will travel for not less than probably 2 months, right? With family together, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I could be working there
Mm-hmm.
because, like I said,
Yeah.
we could technically be working, but that's something that, and the idea there is that the world is changing so fast, Shiva, that I will have a world view on certain things, right? On what would happen in 5 years, but what would happen in 10 years, it is a lot more harder to do it. So the
Mm-hmm.
best thing that you, and I've learned this from my own life, is that you give lot more exposure to the kids. right? And I think travel is probably the best way to give exposure
Mm-hmm.
to anybody, right? So I personally gain quite a bit when I travel, because then again you can draw patterns saying that, hey, I'm looking at a business here. Last time I went to, Japan, and I saw certain other behavior, right? How does this kind of pan out, right? So I think
Mm-hmm.
it just opens your gives you a lot more ideas about it. So that's
Worldview.
something that's one area.
Mm-hmm.
And second is that uh, I like to be healthy,
Mm-hmm.
right? So that's something that I care about. That even when I am, let's say, in 2070 or 2080, hopefully still alive then, right?
Mm-hmm.
I should
Don't die.
still, yeah.
You're following his meal plans, Brian Johnson.
Not really. I think he is probably at a different extreme. I don't know whether I would do that. So not dying is not necessarily.
Yeah,
I am little more orthodox in that.
yeah,
I do plan to. If I could plan to, I would probably die at some point of
yeah.
time. That's
But
not
live healthy until
live
then.
healthy until then, right? So that's
Yeah.
because then you have a lot more energy. You feel better about yourself. You better about family. Feel. I mean, you're just happy.
Hmm. And Ashish, the sense that I've gotten is, as you just said, that whatever you're doing, you ensure that you're all in, nothing in middle. How do you ensure that you are reaching your highest potential?
That's a great question,
Yeah.
right? I don't think I would ever know, right? The only thing that you could check is that, are you better today than yesterday or not,
Hmm.
right? As long as you're making progress, is maths after that,
Yeah.
right? So that's what I have care about, and I have also learned over a period of time, right? So I
Hmm.
would initially think about goals, and I would not create enough milestones in between, right?
Hmm.
Which actually was frustrating. So now I would still create goals, but I would create reasonable milestones in between, right?
Hmm.
And then the reason slightly mid to long term goals are important, because a lot of strategies, you are able to think of strategies keeping that goal in mind, but milestones are important because to get to that goal there are multiple paths,
Hmm.
right? You can't necessarily do everything strategically. A lot of times you also have to do certain tactical shifts as well, right?
Hmm.
Milestones is able to do that, and as long as I feel that I am becoming better than yesterday, I am kind of happy. And I'll give you example. So let's say if I am reading a book, right? I would The way that I test myself is that I would read a chapter and I will typically write down what I understood from this,
Hmm.
and then I have to go back and look at every chapter. I would do that, and I would see if my analysis is becoming crisper or not, sharper or not. If it is becoming sharper, I'm becoming a better reader, as an example.
Hmm.
That's one activity that I engage in.
Hmm.
Similarly, when I am, let's say, working out, right, I am also figuring out that if I do not work out, let's say, for the next 2 weeks, what is it doing to my body, right? In general, is it very transient that I have to work out every day for me to continue to feel better, or am I generally structuring improving my health, so that
Hmm.
I don't have to necessarily feel guilty about going out for a couple of weeks and not being able to work out, right? So
Hmm.
those are some of the things that you will test out. Initially it looks like an effort,
Yeah.
but then it becomes a
Later
habit,
it becomes a habit, a process. So have goals, but have a way to measure
right?
the progress. Ashish, thank you so much. Really appreciate you for making the time and spending some time here with me on the podcast.
Oh, thank you, Shiva. I think you got me to speak quite a bit. I think I thoroughly enjoyed it, and it was just good to reflect on many of the things that I think I've done in life. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.